let's get into it for today. Today, we want to focus a little bit on how do we know which of our trust buckets are actually most important to our audience? What is it that makes us really more trustworthy, and what is it that they would love to trust us for? Of course, as always, you will get a link to the webinar so that you can review it and you can share it. We will also put it up on the website under Academy, and you can always see the whole series that's coming up. When I take you through today, I will do a quick recap, but we will go through it fairly fast because, again, you've got everything at trustlogic.info to review it and then focus a little bit more on our driver analysis. For that purpose, I will simply share my screen and we can get started. Good, here we are. Let's do the recap very quickly first. So whatever industry you're in, 3/4 of your success is determined by trust. If you measure the Net Promoter Score, then your Net Promoter Score is determined by trust by 85%. If you talk about customer or donor satisfaction, 75% is driven by trust. Your donor and customer loyalty is driven 75, 76 by trust. And 70% of your consideration is driven by trust. So for acquisition and for retention, equally important. In statistics, when you reach values of just 40%, that's already considered high. So when you get to the 60, 70%, you can pretty much say that's practically all of it. So trust is critical. If you don't know what drives your trust, it's very hard to move the needle on these aspects. But it is actually almost more important to understand that every little bit more trust actually makes the difference. When we look at the behavior changes of customers and donors based on every change of trust, then we look at the scale here. We measure trust on a scale from 0 to 10, and we know that 0 to 4 means active distrust. So we leave that one out. But if you're getting to 5 and 6, which is trust neutral, then to 7 and 8, which is trust, and 9 and 10, high trust, you see that with every point more trust, your positive behaviors increase almost exponentially. Likelihood to recommend you, the likelihood to buy from you or to donate to you, and of course your loyalty. And especially with loyalty, you see that from a 9 out of 10 to a 10 out of 10, it almost doubles again. So it's very hard to achieve, and you have to really pull everything you've got that makes you more trustworthy to get to those levels. The same applies when we talk about our reputation and our community. Again, that's critically important. On the weekend, I spoke to a guy from the energy industry, and he talked about the community engagement and consultation to put new renewable energy projects up. When you, in any category, we have a lot of that community engagement, the reputation that also then drives regulatory frameworks, and of course, media. When it comes to people and your personal leadership, it's equally important. All those positive behaviors increase almost exponentially with more trust. So again, you've got all the data on trustlogic.info. We won't get into it more here. When you look at the actual value, here we've got an example from charity land where we can see clearly that donors who have neutral trust, a 5 or 6 out of 10, donate on average $15. But when it goes to trust, it's already 3 times more. And if we get to high trust, it is actually 9 times more. We know from our conversations and projects with clients that whatever industry we look into, it's the same kind of value increases. And in fact, in most industries, if they check what are the key factors to decision-making and choice, after price, it is always trust. Stephen Covey wrote a whole book called The Speed of Trust. And he says that with every little bit more trust, the speed pretty much goes up as well, or exponentially. And that makes a lot of sense. If you think about yourself, if you have little trust or you're trust neutral, you're umming and ahhing, you feel that you have to check things off. If you have higher trust, it just greases the wheel and you have no inhibitions of choosing. The same actually goes for effort as well. The more we are trusted, the less effort it takes to get where we need to get. That is also an important aspect. And it makes our lives obviously much easier if we have that trust. It's important to understand that, again, trust is not magic, and even those behavior changes are not magic. Trust has evolved in us as the key sense to survive and to thrive for hundreds of thousands of years. And some of the stuff involved in that trusting experience is oxytocin. It's excreted in our amygdala, the old part of the brain that is also responsible for our fight and flight response. And if it's triggered, it makes us feel good. It makes us feel confident, courageous. It gives us the ability to make decisions. Some of the latest studies where they looked at oxytocin levels in saliva, they connected it with a reduction in the perceived risk, which is absolutely connected to trust. If we perceive it's less risky, of course, we make the decision much easier. So it's important to understand that trusting feelings are a physiological reflex to the signals that are being sent out. And what we do with TrustLogic is we look at how can we help our customers, our donors, our community constituents, and our people to reduce that stress of doubt and increase that confidence and courage based on true things that we already have, but simply identifying what are the best ones to do it. Trust psychologically is not this vague and amorphous thing that no one can grasp. Our trust is clearly made up of all those big and small reasons why you trust. Trust always has to manifest itself. And naturally, as I mentioned before, throughout evolution, our mind has developed a very clear logic to order and assess these reasons. I just watched the Einstein documentary on Netflix, and he made a comment in there where he found that ultimately, he felt that nature will have a very simple equation for what we consider to be very complex. And that's how he came to E equals mc squared. It's probably very similar to what we did with Barbara Großgart and Professor Salber in researching trust, where we found it's like, feels so complex to start with, but ultimately when we get to the crux of it, nature provides something ultimately quite simple. And considering that trust evolved in us as something to simplify our lives and to conserve our energy and resources, then of course trust needs to be ultimately very simple. So if anyone tells you trust is complicated and you have to have 50 million statements to cover it, bullshit. It's definitely wrong. So trust has a very simple logic, and our mind simply orders all these signals, the reasons why we can trust or why we don't want to trust, into 6 categories: stability trust, development trust, relationship trust, benefit trust, vision trust, and competence trust. Again, you can read up on it on the website. Those reasons are manifold, and that gives you an almost infinite playing field to build more trust. In each of those trust areas, and our clients call them the 6 buckets of trust, you've got organizational trust drivers at a global, regional, local level. You've got product and service trust drivers, so it can be one car model against the other one, as an example. And of course, you've got all the individuals, ranging from the CEO right through to the frontline person in the customer service center and even your finance people. If you start to interrogate all these trust drivers and signals that you can have, and we call them often trust triggers because we want to reinforce that it's a physiological reaction that is being triggered. If you find all of these, you get a huge array that you can use to build more trust, but also the ability to determine what makes you most trustworthy in your audience's minds. An easy way to remember those 6 buckets of trust is as pairs, because they're opposite to each other. Stability trust in blue is about the past. What did you achieve in the past? Whereas yellow is development trust, and it's about the future. How do you go forward? So the equation is, what did you achieve in the past and how do you go forward? The second pair is relationship trust and benefit trust. What's it like to be working with you, and what do I get out of that relationship? Psychologically, we never have any relationship without getting a benefit out of it, whatever benefit that is. I've got a friend, a long-standing friend from school, who is perpetually unreliable. So whenever we try to catch up when I'm in Germany, he's late or he simply doesn't show up. So you could say it's an unreliable relationship. However, he is actually a lot of fun if he turns up, and that pretty much outweighs everything. And even with that unreliable behavior, the what's in it for me is I can just forget the world for a few hours and crack stupid jokes. I would never ever consider sharing anything personal or confidential with him, because past has shown that he always tells everyone immediately. So it is very important to define exactly what kind of relationship and what kind of benefit we actually want to get out of a relationship. Then lastly, vision and competence trust. Vision is about our values, our role in society. It is not about business goals. Whereas the competencies are our capabilities that we have to strive for that vision and for that goal. That's an easy way to remember it. Where do you come from? How do you go forward? What's it like to be with you? And what do I get out of it? What vision and values do you stand for? And what competencies do you have to fulfill on those? When we look at it, a question we always get is, are these all equally important? And psychologically, they are. And we prove that statistically over and over as well again. And it's quite logical. All 6 are very important to create the whole of trust. But of course, that's different in every situation. It depends on your brand context, even your competitive and your own activity. It depends on economic and regulatory factors and often media exposure. So a range of factors impact what is important to trust for right now. It also depends on the segments. And we often find there are differences between the segments, what drives their trust. And it depends on the stage in the customer journey. With one of our professional services clients, we quantified the whole journey, and it became very clear that right at the start, for the almost awareness level, stability trust was very important for them. And then the trust buckets shifted, and some of them were combined. But right at the end, before signing a contract and getting to this final ask for the proposal, it was actually vision trust that was most important. And therefore, it's quite important to look at where in the journey do you need to actually build what kind of trust. And we do that in customer experience design in any kind of category, whether we're talking aged care, energy, or even FMCG. So it is different what is important. And what we did to understand which of those trust buckets are most important, we modeled it, and we developed quantitative statements for each of those trust buckets. And we didn't just do it in theory, applying any kind of driver analysis. We aligned it with our practice, our previous cases. And when we modeled it, we applied the outputs of the models in practice to see which ones actually align with reality. And that's probably really important because ultimately it's about what results do we achieve with it. And we modeled for each of the trust buckets 3, 2, and 1 statements. And we did that with different wording combinations. And we did that in 8 different languages to get to ultimately where we came up with. And ultimately, it just turned out 1 statement is fine, but it's got to be quite well calibrated. And there's slight nuances whether we're talking about customers, donors, people, and community. And the driver analysis we found works best to align theory with practice and give you results you can rely on is actually a driver analysis from gaming theory. And that's important because gaming theory driver analysis can deal with closely related human factors, which a lot of other driver analyses that come more from engineering can't do, where it's all cut and dry. So using that, you can then put those statements into your questionnaire. And first of all, you can see your performance. How full are your buckets currently? And you can track over time yourself. How are you progressing in filling them? Of course, you would love to see shifts in there and probably also look at what your competitors are doing. Very simple. You just put the TrustLogic module into your survey and you just check the performance in each of your buckets. But more importantly, to actually then move the needle on your performance is what do you actually need to focus on? And again, if we apply the driver analysis, we see exactly which of those trust buckets are most important for your audience to trust you for. So which area do you need to focus? Here, more development trust and more relationship trust would make you more trustworthy. That's what people want to trust you for. 33% and 24%. And once you know that focus, it makes it much easier to include statements and to interrogate, all right, how do we fill now these 2 trust buckets most effectively? Practically, why it's important to already have that focus is because in any quantitative survey, you can't really realistically include more than 20 to 30 statements or attributes. If you think about that, if you included 30 and you have 6 trust buckets, you would only be able to put 5 statements per trust bucket in there. However, if you know that there are only 2 trust buckets that are important, then you can actually put 15 in for each, and therefore you get a far bigger variety, a bigger granularity, and you can measure it much better. And that's how you find very specific things that you can then communicate, or sometimes it's features. Like here we've got an example out of a not-for-profit where relationship trust was most strongly driven by the fact that they're empowering child leaders to take their future in their own hands. Or on development trust, that they're continuously running cutting-edge pilots all across the world to create best practices, like solar-powered 3D printers to produce spare parts to repair water pumps in the most inaccessible regions. So it is very specific messages, and you can start playing around with them. With one telco, it's quite surprising what drove their trust most, because the most important trust bucket was benefit trust. But it was not that it reliably connects or that it's accessible everywhere, that they have a very good customer service, none of those, or pricing, but it was in fact the leadership succession determined by the board that created in that case, at that time, the biggest possible trust. So it can be quite surprising. You can, of course, apply as well a predictive model, and you can see exactly which trust buckets and specific features, messages, actions will give you an uplift in your NPS and in your trust, and by how much. And as a practical example, in a client case in the media industry, we achieved that development trust, which was most important for them, increased by 19% over 4 months. and trust and the NPS overall increased by 10% each. And that was connected to improvements in sales, in reduction of customer cancellations, and in reductions to complaints. Another really important aspect is actually brand trust differentiation. We often talk about the need to differentiate and differentiate better on more relevant aspects. TrustLogic gives you the opportunity with the driver analysis to know exactly what differentiates you from your competitors. And it does so systematically. Even in categories where people say it's the same kind of company, just different name. So effectively, same shit, different name. We find that there are big differences. Typically, the drivers of brand trust are very different amongst them, whether it's the big four banks, whether it is charities, whether it is energy companies or food companies. And in this case, we see that for brand A, it's relationship and vision trust that is most important. However, for brand B, it is relationship trust and benefit trust that's most important. And that gives you an amazing new playing field to drive your brand strategy and brand differentiation. So while having more trust is a big deal, doubling your propensity to be recommended for people to buy from you or to donate from you doubles with every point more trust. You can simply include the TrustLogic module with the 6 statements in any of your surveys. And it takes less than 10 seconds to fill in. And you actually know what drives your trust. You can track your progress yourself, how full your buckets are. And we simply conduct the driver analysis for you. In fact, we don't even insist on doing it ourselves. You can do that with your preferred partners and include it into your survey system, whether you're using Qualtrics or whether you are using SurveyMonkey or other platforms. That also allows you, if you are having that connected to your frontline, to look at the specific messages and features and play them out straight through your Salesforce HubSpot to the frontline to be used even by segment. The nice thing for you is that it's perfectly aligned, and in fact, it boosts any of your KPI programs because, as we've seen, all your KPIs are driven by the vast majority by trust. So don't change your KPIs. That's not the question. The question is actually, do you have a working model or a workhorse to better help you understand what drives your NPS, satisfaction, loyalty, or acquisition? And TrustLogic gives you an additional tool to do that quite nicely. Another really important aspect why clients choose this is because it's intuitive for everyone. We all know somehow about trust. It's very hard to go to people and say, build the net promoter score. We want them to recommend us more. But it's much easier to talk to people and say, what we want to achieve is to be more trusted. And because everyone wants to be more trusted, it becomes self-driven. Everyone also wants to work for the most trusted organization. Again, drives the self-driven nature of implementation. And overall, we make it easy by having a cost of just about a focus group for the annual subscription or license for the TrustLogic. And next time, we're going to have a look at how we create brand strategies with TrustLogic. And you can find all our webinars that are coming up on the website under Academy. But if you have specific topics you would like to discuss, just reach out. Always happy with the team to chat about specific questions you might have, or if it's a webinar that comes up only in a few months' time, but you need it now, just let us know and discuss with us. All the information is at trustlogic.info. Thank you. Bye.